All right, so David, let's begin. Tonight's author is a former journalist, publisher, screenwriter, and film producer. He worked as a literary agent for none other than Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, among others. He is the author of Too Good to Be Forgotten, Changing America in the 60s and 70s, which was published in 1998. And now he brings us Saving Ourselves from Big Car. It's a book that personally I find interesting because my father owned a 76 gas station in Santa Barbara in the 70s. Yes, 76 was the official sponsor of the 1969 Santa Barbara oil spill. I've also been personally on the wrong end of no less than 5 bicycle car collisions. Further attest how dangerous an automobile can be thanks to its drivers. I am so pleased to bring David, so please welcome David. David, before we begin, since bless his soul, he just passed, you knew Bob Redford. And if you could share a little bit about your interactions with him.
Well, I have 2 Redford stories that come to mind. The first was when we were shooting All the President's Men, the movie at Warner Brothers. A journalist friend who I'd worked with, named Seymour Hirsch, and I went out to visit the set. And Cy was a big shot investigative reporter for the New York Times. And Redford invited us to come back to his house to play tennis with him, which was very cool. And so we go out, and he's got his own private tennis court, and we play really hard mixed doubles, and it's getting down to the last points, and suddenly Cy starts to lose it. And when Cy starts to lose it, it's not a pretty sight. And he gets more and more frustrated, and finally, at the set point, he hits one into the fence, and he throws his racket as hard as he can at the fence, but it sails over the fence and goes to a seating area where Robert Redford's 6-year-old daughter was sitting in her beautiful white dress, eating a bowl of chocolate ice cream. Smashes into her, goes over. Game, set, and match. Another Redford incident was when we premiered All the President's Men. It was at the, we call it the Trump Center now, or the Kennedy Center?
Still the Kennedy Center.
It was at the Kennedy Center, and he was, for me, it doesn't get any bigger than this. And so I'm in the men's room, and in walks Redford, and of course we know each other, and he walks up to me, and he grabs me by my suit lapels and slams me against the wall. And he said, "How could you do this to me? You've ruined my career." And what he was angry about was that the sequel to All the President's Men, a book called The Final Days, was to be published the next day, and he thought it would take all of the juice away from All the President's Men. These people have very fragile egos. Finally, he puts me down and look at him and I go, "Bob, I promise I'll never do it again." So, oh good, here's my kid is actually showing up. Everybody applaud when he walks up.
Come up from LA, so that's nice.
Seriously, just
Right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, expected it.
There is one chair.
so Sonny, come sit up front.
But Sonny has a girlfriend.
since you're the person responsible for all this, this is my granddaughter, Sunny Obst. And her father, it's Oliver, right? Yeah. And I was driving with Sunny down to LA, and we hit a total traffic jam. And I said to her,
Louder.
I hate traffic. And she said, Papa, you are the traffic. And like an explosion went off in my head because I realized she was right. And I said, how did this happen? And for the next 4 years, I've been digging in the weeds to try and figure out how this happened. And the result is this book. And it's an easy read. It's an easy read. I turned in the first draft a year before publication to Columbia Business School, and they
It's a party for you here, so
they said it's like a surprise party.
Yeah.
And they said, great book, but we're not going to publish it. And I go, why not? He says, because it's all your opinions. And that's not what we do at Columbia Business School. Sources. So I had to go back and spend almost a year digging in and be able to do this. So the book is well sourced. There's no opines on my part whatsoever. It's just these are the facts. And here are the facts. Big Car, which is a conglomeration of the automobile industry, gasoline business, the tire business, the asphalt business, lobbyists in Congress, together have turned the American dream into a nightmare. Because unless we get control over it, and fairly soon, we will be obliterated as a species. Last year, over 1 million human beings were killed by the automobile industry. Many of them in what they call car accidents, but none of them were accidents. An accident is when you drop a plate of cookies. These were car crashes. They're the only business to get away with this. They are subsidized by $4 trillion a year paid into their coffers to keep them going. So, I have some prepared notes now. First and foremost, I'd like to thank my parents and lovers. Sorry, that was my bar mitzvah speech. Last week, the new head of the Environmental Protection Agency went on NBC Nightly News and said, quote, "The Trump administration is going to drive a spike into the heart of the environmental movement, removing cumbersome laws on those who provide our fuel." The next 4 stories on NBC Nightly News were about hurricanes, fires, floods, and windstorms. And the irony, of course, is lost on all. Nobody mentioned that this was all due to climate change in big part. The lies that they've bought into, that we've bought into, about how Big Car created the American dream, is a very easy one to succumb to I did, I'm sure all of you have in your own ways, is we're all pretty much addicted to having to use our cars. And like all addicts, we say, I could stop anytime, but we can't. Or I don't need to use it, but we do. And what my book shows in excruciating detail is first how Big Car was able to, in less than 50 years, take over the United States. And then since then, how it's totally controlled how we eat, how we mate, how we consume media, and how we use mobility. If you combine the payrolls of assembly line workers, steel workers, rubber workers over the past century, along with the money that big oil has made, the resulting figure would be a staggering percentage of our gross national product. We basically live to make cars in America. It's almost as if we were created to consume and produce more and more cars. And this has gone on for quite a while. The first book I did was called In the Name of Profit, Profiles in Corporate Greed. And what it was a collection of stories about how corporate America and the people who ran it did things that were not necessarily beneficial to the general public. So, for example, we had a chapter about how General Motors had a school bus that they knew the brakes were bad on, but they figured it was cheaper to pay for settling with kids who were killed in car crashes than recalling all their buses and fixing them. Not a single person from General Motors was ever indicted, prosecuted, or held accountable for them. And 9 other stories similar to that. 50 years later, Big Car is the exact same book. These people are doing the same thing that corporate America has done for years. And I'm not a communist, I'm not a socialist, I'm not a person who wants to upend the political order, but there's something wrong with the system where making profits supersedes personal health. So, for example, Big Car knew for 40 years that by simply adding a $4 seatbelt into cars, you could save tens of thousands of lives. They didn't do it because it would cost them an extra $4.13 a car. They knew that shatterproof glass would save innumerable lives. They didn't do it because it was too expensive. But the most egregious thing that they did was kill massive amount of human beings through an additive that they put into our gasoline called ethyl. A quick history. At the beginning of the 20th century, the biggest problem in urban America was the horse. 130,000 horses a day would come into New York City alone, and each of them would leave 23 pounds of manure. And And you do this day after day after day, and you have a city that's not so pleasant to live in. So, what do? We invent the car. First cars were electric, and they were very efficient, but the problem is World War I meant that most of the stuff that you needed to build these kind of cars went into the war effort, and so the electric car disappeared. It was replaced for a short period by the external combustion engine, which is steam. It was very impractical, and it didn't really work either. So what prevailed was the internal combustion engine. Henry Ford, one of the villains in the book, comes up with the brilliant idea of putting together an assembly line so that he can mass produce cars. And he does so with a vengeance. He has so many cars coming out that
Sonny's coming.
at one point he has 70% of all of the cars in America in the late 20s are Model T Fords. He says anybody can have any color Ford they want as long as it's black. Henry Ford had a couple of flaws. One was his rampant hatred of Jews. Even though he didn't really know any, he just detested them. If you bought a new Ford, in the back seat of your car was a copy of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion,
No.
a screed that is one of the leading anti-Semitic books ever published. As a result of Henry Ford, the men who founded the Third Reich, Hitler and his minions, in fact, Hitler had a giant picture of Henry Ford behind him in his Munich headquarters and gave Henry Ford the highest medal that Germany could award any foreigner. The first one went to Mussolini. The second one went to Ford. The head of Hitler Youth said, "We never would have been able to figure out how to solve the Jewish problem had it not been for Henry Ford."
Good God.
That doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. That's the point. Oh, God.
No, it doesn't make any sense. Another villain is a man named Robert Keogh. Robert Keogh was a scientist who worked for the Ethel Corporation. So back to my story. The internal combustion engine wins out. The problem is it doesn't burn gasoline smoothly, and for the older people in the room, you'll remember cars backfiring, which was a horrible sound, and they'd sputter and cough and do things. So, in 1926, the Ethel Corporation is founded by Standard Oil, General Motors, and Dow Chemical as co-owners. What could go wrong? They put an additive into ethyl gasoline that causes internal combustion engines to burn cleanly. That additive is lead. For the next 70 years, the Ethel Corporation has total control over all data about the effects of lead on human beings. No scientist, no research lab, no university, no journalist, nobody was able to find out what the effects were on human beings. The World Health Organization now states that as a result of our having lead in our gasoline, more human beings died during that century since we've had it than were killed in World War II. Two men, Alfred Sloan and Howard Ketterling from the Sloan Ketterling Institute, alone are responsible for more human deaths than communism and Nazism combined. I didn't know this when I began the book, and I was shocked that there weren't stories about this or other things coming out about it, and there probably never will be, because the problem with big car is that they control big media. If you want to take a full-page ad in the New York Times, it costs you $75,000. An obituary only costs you $50. Who do you think they're going to give their resources to? The people who are supposed to be watching out for us in the Department of Transportation. 3/4 of those people leave working in the Department of Transportation and become lobbyists for big car. And while they're there, they go in and talk to the next person who's working there and say, hey, if you want a 6-figure job and a beautiful house in the suburbs, you play ball with us. And they all did. And this revolving door meant that we weren't protected by Congress, we weren't protected by trade associations, we weren't protected by anybody, and Big Car could do whatever they wanted, and they did. And the result was 70,000 human beings have died from lead poisoning, according to the World Health Organization, in the last 75 years. This
You just said 70, not.
75 years.
No, 700,000 died?
No,
7 million?
You said 70,000 people died of lead
no,
poisoning.
70 million.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Makes sense.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Jim. The result. This is why I can't do anything without it. All right, just to wrap up. What finally happens is one heroic figure, a man named Claire Patterson, who's a geologist at Caltech. He's the man who discovered carbon dating of rocks, so he's a big shot. If there was a Nobel Prize in geology, he would have received it. He found that all of his samples were tainted by lead. He went into his lab at Caltech and found that the entire laboratory was coated in lead. Everywhere he looked, lead. He said, how is this possible? He starts to look into it. The Ethel Corporation sends 3 representatives to Caltech to meet with Professor Patterson. And they said, we are just so admiring of your work. We'd like to set up your own lab for you, unlimited research budget, whatever you want, just one thing. Stay off the lead. He tells them no. Now, he's a tenured professor, so they can't fire him. What they do is the next worst thing, is they send him on a sabbatical to Yosemite by himself without any research money, without any research students to work with. He's all by himself in a cabin for the next 2 years. in Yosemite. And what does he do? He begins taking samples for lead. And what does he find?
Lead in Yosemite?
Yeah. Oh,
We're
yeah.
everywhere.
Oh,
Oh
yeah.
my God.
It's everywhere. So he realized that the particulates of this float, because the closest city is 350 miles away, is it's come all the way there and has polluted this whole area. So he had read about the work of Rachel Carson, the woman who wrote Silent Spring, and he decided to go to Washington and meet with the two senators who helped her, Edmund Muskie and Stuart Udall. And they agreed to hold hearings. At the hearings, Patterson's not allowed to speak.
Huh.
Big Oil keeps him from being able to get the podium. At the end of the hearings, the headlines in the newspapers are, Ethel is back.
Huh.
They totally exonerate the Ethel Corporation and find out that, and say that lead is no more destructive to people than a drop of water in your gasoline. And they're paid for the next 3-4 years until Santa Barbara saves the day. Because in 1969, we have the oil spill there. The derrick explodes. Oil washes onto the shore. In those days, Santa Barbara was a pretty rock-ribbed Republican community. The President of the United States at that time is Richard Nixon. He flies out to Santa Barbara and walks along the shore and sees all these dead birds and goes, we have to do something about this. And here's something you can win a lot of money in a bar bet which president founded the EPA. It was Richard Nixon.
Good for him.
He puts together the Environmental Protection Agency and then pretty much forgets about it. Okay? They're pretty powerless, but a few years later they put together something called the Clean Air Act. And the Clean Air Act calls for every car from 1975 on to have a catalytic converter put into its engine. The Ethel Corporation is not worried about this because nobody's ever invented a catalytic converter. They don't exist. They figure it'll be decades before this will be a problem. But Revenge of the Nerds. They come up with it. And by 1975, every new car in America that comes out has a catalytic converter in its engine. The problem for the Ethel Corporation is that if you put leaded gasoline into that engine, it smothers the catalytic converter and the car dies
Before it gets out of the gas station.
right in the gas station line. So, for those of you old enough to remember,
You have water there.
oh, thanks. For those of you who remember there used to be leaded and unleaded pumps at gas stations. What they did was they changed the nozzle size
Yeah.
of unleaded gas so it would fit into new cars, and the old one wouldn't, and that's how we got rid of leaded gasoline in America. Now,
You gonna
just
take some questions?
yeah, I'll take a few questions. Just one last thing I'd like to add is that the book is not all doom and gloom. I have a bunch of funny stories in it. I have a wonderful profile of the Wienermobile that Oscar Mayer used to drive around in. But more importantly is the last chapter of the book is I went around and found 10 communities throughout the world who have found ways to be private car independent. These are communities in Tempe, in Portland, in Copenhagen, and Taipei, and many other places. So Helsinki. Excuse me. And what I would hope that for any of you who decide to read the book is that you'll take a look at that and look at what you can do in your own community to start to change this. I've been fortunate enough to meet with Dr. Dan over here, who is a former Center for Disease Control scientist, but also avid bike enthusiast and humanitarian. And we're now beginning to work with the city of Santa Barbara to try and put together car-free zones, private car-free zones. Oh, thanks, Kate. I have thanks. Private car-free zones, and as soon as I finish my book tour,
You're gonna work on that?
we're going to go do it. And we just met with County Supervisor John Hartman and Phyllis Capps and a bunch of people from the City Council. And what we're going to do is carve out one part of Santa Barbara and make it a place where you don't need to have your own car to get places.
Okay.
Question.